Okay, so welcome everybody to today's webinar from the ELN, which today features a relaxed discussion about some work that O2 have been doing. And Andy, one of our directors on the board, has set this up for us. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Andy to do more introductions.
Sure thing. Hi Joan, hi Andy, hi Chris. The context really from my perspective is I had a chat with Chris about 3 or 4 weeks ago and just said, what have you been up to? And Chris told me this story, and maybe about 4 or 5 times during that story, I went, you really need to be sharing this with people. You should really be telling people. And then I had a very similar conversation with Andy. I probably said exactly the same thing again. So here we are. This isn't really a let's share best practice. It's really just let's share what you did. You know, what you did and what you learned from doing it, in the hope that the attendees can get something out of that. So really that was my drive. I think you guys have got a fantastic and fascinating story to tell, just because of what you did, the way that you did it. So I think what I'd like to do is just jump straight into it, but begin by inviting you to set your context. So just fill in the background of what it was you were trying to achieve or what drove you to make the decisions that you did. And then throughout this session, it is just going to be a relaxed conversation. I'll keep an eye on chat to see if there's any particular comments or questions that we want to bring out for you guys to respond to. And then towards the end, we have thought about turning the whole discussion into a panelist experience where we can actually enable all the attendees to share cameras and mics and then have a much more open discussion. We think that the total time for this will be about 30 to 40 minutes, but there's no hard and fast rules. It is literally, let's have a chat about what you did. So with that, over to you. Start with Andy, yeah?
Yeah. Hello,
yeah, okay,
and
cool.
hello again to everybody. When Andy, well, actually, Andy, we've spoken about this type of thing, I think, multiple times over the last couple of years, and so I thought the best way to start this would be to bring to life our context. This particular piece of work is just a piece of the puzzle. It's not in any way unique, and actually, the catalyst to move fast was what's going on at the moment with the pandemic. But it's not representative of the type of things that we aren't doing anyway, if you know what I mean. So what I've done is I've grabbed a couple of slides that I've used elsewhere, because I thought that might be helpful in sharing it. So it's not, I wouldn't see this as a big presentation, so to speak, but I just thought this might be helpful. So I'll start with that, and then Andy, because I'm looking at my slides, if you could just stop me if someone's asking a question, because obviously I'm not looking at the chat.
Sure.
That's okay. And then, so what I'll do is I'll bring to life the context of what we've done and why we've done it. And then Chris, who I would describe as our, in the O2 campus team, our technical genius. I'm going to call him a wizard, actually, for the purpose of this. And I hate the fact he's hearing it, because now he's going to remember it. But never mind. So here we go. So I actually, the slides I've stolen, I did a video into LinkedIn trying to very quickly bring some stuff to life, and I've stolen some from there. So if you want, I do have, I did talk about more detail in those slides, in that video, sorry. So if you pop on my LinkedIn profile, you'll be able to hear me ramble on for even longer. And this is where I'd like to start talking about our context. So we created O2 Campus 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. And at that point, that's when we started our journey that led to where we are now. And so I came up with these 7 points that I thought, excuse me, it's hay fever. I've been sneezing and coughing all morning. Anyway, so these are the 7 points that that we focused on. So the first one, which I want to share with you in a single slide next, is that it was important to us that we were doing what we're doing, understanding why. So we created our content management strategy and design principles that haven't changed since, and that we kind of live and breathe behind every learning solution that we do in O2 Campus. And that's important because when Chris explains some of the stuff we've done, you'll be able to see why we did it. Second point is using a social platform. So we have Workplace by Facebook. If you haven't heard of it, you've probably heard of Facebook. So it's just Facebook for Business. The only difference between Facebook and Workplace is the logo, and that the only people in there are the people in your organization. Otherwise, features, functions, way it works, it's identical. But equally, I think that's Workplace is brilliant, but I think, if you've got Yammer, if you've got any other social platform. And the other point here is, don't be a slave to your LMS. We have an LMS, we have SuccessFactors, we don't particularly like it, but we have it. People have good LMSs, bad LMSs, whatever. They are a means to an end and they serve as a purpose. But what we don't want to be is a slave to it. We don't want to design our learning experiences around what our LMS will and won't do. That's important. The third one is leveraging experts, so leveraging the people in the business that either know stuff or just have a louder voice than we do. And that's been crucial to this experience that Chris is going to share. The fourth one, as a guiding principle into this case study, actually is really important. Even though I think it's been refined quite well. Chris won't call it perfect, but it's been refined very well. So perfect sucks. In other words, it's about making something happen for us. It's about delivering an experience that gives you what you need. It's about learning from the idea that a video on a phone with insightful information is better than a high production value video that doesn't give you what you need. And then the fifth one's about video. So we do as much video as we possibly can. And obviously today we want to talk about live streaming, where we are in O2 Campus exploring what I think is a fundamentally different format to a webinar like this. I don't think it's a different way of doing webinars. I think it's totally different. And that is bringing what I would describe as broadcasting skills into L&D, because it opens so many different doors. And then which is what number 6 is about, actually. Think about what a virtual classroom is, because in short, it's whatever you want it to be. This whole online classroom, virtual classroom, webinar, what are they, how they should be? They are whatever you want them to be, or at least that's how we see it. And the 7th and final one, which again lives and breathes nicely in this case study, is the way we like to approach a need in O2 with O2 Campus is we won't make anything, create anything, buy anything in. We won't present something that didn't already exist if we first can't find it. So what we do is we look to curate content from open source. We have an account with LinkedIn Learning, so we'll pull from there too. And when we create content, we do so around the gaps, rather than the other way around, which I think is often more common, where you create something and then try and curate the gaps, and that just doesn't work. So that's our I guess a quick, what do we do and how do we do it? So the other thing I thought would be useful to share, in the hope that if you can kind of have this in your mind as we share our case study, is our content strategies, obviously explained in more detail than this, but this is a short version of what it is. So when we define the O2 Campus experience, we do so knowing that not all, I've got a team of 7 learning consultants. We're responsible for all content at O2, but we've got 3,000 things. It doesn't take a genius to figure out we can't make all that. We can't monitor all that. So content comes from loads of different places. And this example that we're sharing you today is content that we help to facilitate from our corporate learning university. So that's an example. So the strategy is important because it defines the O2 learning experience. It's a bit like this is the key to the front door. If you haven't got it, you can't come in, if that makes sense. So and in our strategy, and this is a much bigger conversation, if anyone ever wants to pick up, they can. But we look at accessibility. Not, by the way, when you say accessibility, don't think about platform. Think about this, learning doesn't always happen in a digital environment. Accessibility in all forms, plus engagement, which in there we start thinking about engaging content, of course, but we also think about how you get, how you market in and awareness. And I think marketing is a really important lens for O2 Campus. In fact, it's one of our biggest successes, how we market learning into the business rather than communicate. Efficiency, so we look at what's the most efficient way to deliver a solution. And an interesting lens for you when you hear Chris talk later is we didn't spend a penny on the learning solution that we did, which I would describe as our best digital learning experience since campus existed. And it didn't cost us anything. and then pace, in other words, operating at the pace the business needs us to, and that's where our impact comes from. So that's our strategy, and then this is what we like to call our learning design recipe. This is our design principles, and the reason why we, I know it sounds a bit fun to call it a design recipe, but we talk a lot about the fact that they're not 5 principles that operate in isolation. We look to see all of them in all of our learning experiences, and that's why it's a recipe. I used to say you can't make a cake without eggs, and then someone told me you can. So clearly I don't know how to bake. So there's a better analogy in there somewhere. It's just not for me to come up with. So just to quickly share them with you. So stealing with pride, that first one, I kind of already mentioned that. We just run around looking for stuff and say, how close can you get? Is it close enough? Not is it perfect? Designing once for us is a digital thing, in that, you know, you design for mobile, it tends to work on desktop, but not the other way around. But it's also, I'll give you an example. Last year we launched, year before last, we launched a new approach to coaching across the organization. And when we did that, we stripped ourselves clear of any other approaches. So there's one way to do coaching at O2. We call it big chats, little chats. So you design once. Digital is for us. So I want to be clear that in O2 Campus, we don't say digital's the best thing to do and it's the only thing to do. In fact, we love doing face-to-face, but we reserve face-to-face for when it's the best way of achieving something, which is normally for us, you know, if you're trying to implement any behavioral change or skills practice, that type of thing. But it's very rarely the best environment to share knowledge. So, you know, that's us. And then the next one is about communities. Of course, we do that primarily in Workplace by Facebook at O2, but communities are physical as well as digital. So it's about how we can use communities, because I think people mostly talk about that moment when they nailed something, when they learned it. I think is more often not in a classroom, a piece of e-learning, a video, whatever. It's more often doing the do or role modeling or shadowing someone or something like that. And then finally, focused and bite-size. So we chose the word focused and bite-size rather than the more typical micro-learning that you hear out there at the minute, because for us, it's not about small pieces. It's about breaking it down into manageable pieces that are in context with the situation. So it does mean that most of our videos are less than 10 minutes, but it doesn't mean that's a rule. You know, so, and hopefully what we'll share with you now shows how we've created a journey of learning that can be consumed in bite-sized chunks, putting the choice of how that's done in the learner's hand. So yeah, that's our learning design recipe. Is there any comments or questions, Andy? I've only got one more. I can see things popping up. You're muted, Andy, so if I could read.
Yeah, don't worry, Andy. I do that all the time. You can tell the lips move, there's no noise. Catherine Chambers has done a job of really underpinning one of your comments. She goes, yes, on broadcast thinking, totally agree with what you're saying. Catherine's L&D approach comes completely from broadcast background, former BBC Radio multi-platform and academy.
Oh, perfect.
And we did this with the academics for live Google Hangouts, and it worked really well.
Oh, so what I'm hearing is we need to...
You're not a lone voice on that one, Andy.
No. We need to steal her, is what I'm hearing. She needs to come. That sounds like someone that would work really well with us. Anyway, so all this stuff is there. It's not it's a mental tick box. It is what it is to my team. But also when we work with suppliers that come in, we always, so a supplier, and you know this, Andy, because you're a supplier of O2, we bring to life our design principles as a condition of working with us. So because, like I said, we can't be behind every piece of content. And then I think the final slide is, there's no information on this. So just to bring to life the actual challenge that we were dealing with here. So because of all the work we've done in creating and embedding O2 Campus in the last few years, we were fortunate, and I'll say lucky, because no one knew this was going to happen, but we were fortunate enough that when everyone went into lockdown, remote working overnight became an urgent need. And I think primarily we're all running around saying, can't do classrooms, can't do this, can't do that. How do we do it in a digital environment? That we didn't have anything to convert. So we've got, our portfolio is made up about 3,000 items in O2 Campus, 98% of which are non-facilitated digital learning. 1% is facilitated like a webinar, and only 1% is classroom. So and the classrooms were designed in such a way to complement the knowledge that's imparted in digital. So there wasn't a big conversion job, which made us lucky enough to be able to focus on our experience and how we can make the most out of it and how we can support people. So for example, our frantic running around like headless chickens that everyone was doing was about how do we create a space that makes it easy for people to access the particular pieces of content that's helpful, such as learning to help people get the most out of a remote working environment. So we created in campus a dedicated area. We also started to look across HR about how we can make campus, because it's the most accessible platform in O2. It's outside of our VPN, doesn't require any security to get into it other than the login credentials, and it's not an intranet that people can't get to. Our VPNs, went crazy because too many people were using it. So we also started to bring into that experience our policies and guides, which historically we would have said, no, it's not learning, doesn't come in. So we brought it in anyway because we wanted to create one home. So dial ahead a few weeks, we then entered into a conversation with our colleagues in O2 is Telefonica UK. It's a brand, it's not a company. However, we're a brand that runs a company, if that makes sense. So we do operate in partnership with Telefonica Global, but often those things sit outside, and politically there's often a divide between the UK and the global business and then the other countries that Telefonica operate in. The one, I'm going to call it institution, that kind of bans across the different countries that Telefonica operate in is our corporate university, or Telefonica Universitas. And it's I think a prestigious thing internally. It's a physical university. It's not a digital university, based up a mountain on the outskirts of Barcelona. And it's a really focused experience in terms of it's generally leadership, but not exclusively. And it's generally leveraged for our high potential talent programs, et cetera, et cetera. And it works. It's not scalable, but it works. It works because it delivers, like, for example, the what I would call the flagship program of Universitas is we call Leading Self. It's a program collaboratively developed by Universitas and Oxford Leadership, and it's a week-long residential. And I know there's lots of different companies do lots of different versions of this type of thing, but the point is, when you get this type of thing right, not only you enable people in the organization, but you change lives. I know that sounds deep, but that's the type of program it is. It really does do that. And so Universitas, with this program and the others, essentially just shut. It isn't part of our responsibility or remit. It's just something we would leverage and send people to. So we opened a conversation with them to say, what are the possibilities? The going in position of most was, this is so experiential. It might be a week-long course, but there's virtually no content. It's all about the experience and the conversations that you go through in that week. But the choices are simple. We do nothing and leave the whole thing closed until the end of whatever this thing that we're in is called, or we try and do something, and if it doesn't work, who cares? Bearing in mind all the principles that I told you about earlier, there is no harm in trying. What we did believe is Leading Self, in terms of a journey through understanding yourself, a journey to not design or create or write, but bit like an investigator, to research and discover what you stand for, what your values and your purpose are, those types of things. So it's a deep journey. Okay, so it might be hard to create that experience digitally, but we also know it's probably one of the most useful things we could give our people right now. Because they're overdosed on how to use, why you should do video, why you should turn your video on in a meeting, and leading from a distance. We've done that, or whatever. Actually, I think people are struggling at an emotional level, and this is a journey that right now you've got the desire and willingness to go on that journey from a lot of people. So we thought, let's have a go. Now, the first pilot that Universitas run was with with Spain. And all they did is two things. They took 4 and a bit days worth of content, which were in Universitas, that was made up of a number of what they call plenary sessions. Think of those as in the conference room, on the stage, 60 to 90 minutes, whatever. And they were also made up of workshops and conversations and reflective inquiry. They condensed that down to 3 days, made up of 4 plenary sessions and other stuff, and they ran it through Teams. 2 things happened. They were surprised in how well the content was received, but the technology and the attempt of trying to facilitate mini workshops throughout it worked in occasions, but it was really messy. And they thought, well, we're not doing that again. So the conversation with us is, we want to do it in the UK. We said, well, this is a no-brainer. We've got to try this. But if you don't mind, I think we can do the technology better. And so this is where we thought, let's do what we know. We've spent the last couple of years doing this. We know the best digital experience that we can deliver, if you just go back to design, not try and convert, is live broadcast. Because what we can do is reach more people in a more engaging way. And some would say, yeah, but they can't use video, they can't do this. Yeah, but you can do a bunch of other stuff that's way more impactful. The idea that in that seminar room, in that conference room in Universitas, that Rory, our Chief Learning Officer, is delivering content on the stage and everyone's just chatting to each other is incredibly rude. In fact, quite difficult even in a webinar scenario. But when you live stream, it's quite the opposite. It's success. It's what you want them to be doing. And it's a fundamentally different environment, not to deliver information, not to do a typical live stream, but to run training. So what we decided to do was to embark on a process of creating a 2-day version of Leading Self. We call it Leading Self Online. And our classroom would be a group in Workplace. So again, if you don't know Workplace, a group in Facebook. We'll deliver our plenaries via live stream, and we will create a place with facilitators, back to my point in the first slide, not from L&D, from the business, that know the Leading Self program, to kind of load it full of reflective inquiry exercises, places where people can discover themselves and talk to other people. And the genius that made the technology happens to be on the call. So I'm going to use this as a chance to hand over to you, Chris. Well, unless there's any questions first, Andy.
Nothing yet, although I'll keep an eye on chat if anything comes through.
Okay.
And can I just play back my understanding of the kind of the challenge you were facing, and then correct me if I'm wrong, and then
Yes.
we'll use that as the handover to Chris. So you've got this high prestige program running in a high prestige location that traditionally you were shipping people into Spain to run, and you're unable to do that. They've had a go at doing it as a digital experiment outside of the UK. You've decided to do it digitally inside the UK using some of the processes that you've learnt around live broadcasting.
Absolutely correct, yeah.
Cool, right, excellent. Now, Catherine has shared a blog with all attendees on the subject of using live broadcasting, I assume, Catherine. So hopefully that summary helps. Over to you, Chris.
Cool, thank you, Andy and Andy. So as Andy Scrase kind of left it, we were in a place where we knew we were going to do this. We'd already picked it up and said, yeah, we can do that a little bit better, and we'd identified the technology was going to be the thing to work on. So that's where I came in. One thing I do like is a problem with solutions, but generally problems do have a solution if you look hard enough. And what we really needed to focus on was the fact that Teams clearly hadn't worked very well before. And we wanted to let people concentrate on what they were good at. So on one hand, we had people like Rory and our own, we had John from our team facilitating too. Expert facilitators, they can talk all day, they can tell their stories, they can really get people intrigued and listening. And I think if Rory ever watches this back, he won't be too upset if I describe as someone who doesn't really care too much for the technology behind it. He just wants to tell his stories. So we needed to provide something to allow him to do what he's good at.
That was the polite version, right?
And on the flip side,
he's a technophobe.
I was going to use that word, but you just did. So if he is watching, that was Andy that said that. And on the flip side, we had a bunch of attendees who just wanted to be in the moment. They wanted to be there. They wanted to be at virtual universitas. So no barriers to joining, no barriers to the learning. And that's really where I say I came in. We did have a team of people doing this, facilitating it and making sure everything was in the right place at the right time. And what we decided was Teams was great for a conversation. So as a large multinational business, we cannot just pick up a new application, a new system, and just integrate into what we do. We have to have it checked by IT. We have to have it passed for security, etc. So we had Teams. We knew we had to use Teams for the conversation aspect, and we had Workplace, which is already sort of something that everyone is good at using. They look forward to using it. They get really engaged with Workplace. So the glue that holds them both together was something called OBS. OBS is broadcast software. So some of you in the chat may have already used it, already seen it. For those uninitiated, OBS is quite often, if you see people live streaming on Twitter, on YouTube, gamers, things like that, OBS is normally the thing that's holding them together. So it's a bit of free software, it's open source. And essentially what you can do is you can build a broadcast output. So you can output video to dozens of different services. So in our case, we're using Workplace. And what that enabled us to do was to have a really nice conversation in Teams. So we could invite Rory and John, the two facilitators. We could invite them into a Teams conversation, and they're just having a chat. They are just doing what they do best, which is telling their stories, having an engaging conversation, and just getting lost in the moment. And then there's this whole bunch of technology that's going off in the background, which is adding things to it. So I'm going to try sharing my screen. Andy, I think there we go. So this is not going to turn into a how to use OBS session, but just to give you an idea about what that looks like. Hopefully you should be able to see that right now. You've kind of got an input and an output. So you've got what you want to capture, all the things you can add to it. So we've got slides, we've got videos we can play, we've got transitions between them. We can have multiple videos on the screen at the same time. And what that means is we essentially can curate as close to possible a face-to-face session. So we can have the speakers and we can have the slides appearing as they want the slides to appear. What that enabled us to do really was to allow the facilitators to do their thing, and I can provide the slides, the technical backup. I can click the buttons that make things happen. The reason we then put it into Facebook, into Workplace, is to enable the social side of things. So we had a team of non-video facilitators on Workplace. We can pipe the video directly into Workplace. So it's almost like hitting the go live button that I know a lot of you are probably used to. You want to do a quick video blog. You just want to get your message out there. You go on your phone, you hit go live on whether it's Facebook, whether it's Workplace, whether it's YouTube, anything like that. Instead of going live off your camera, you can go live from OBS. You hit the same buttons. It works the same way. The people sat at home with their cups of coffee can see leading self. They can see the video that's coming off my computer with everything that's been stitched together. And we can have that conversation. So like Andy says, it's nice that we were seeing this conversation develop. We were seeing people chatting about what's happening, even just saying hello to each other, and just getting really involved in it and talking about what they're seeing without it appearing rude. So the end result for them was they're seeing, if I dare say so, quite a polished broadcast. They're seeing slides, presenters, which builds the engagement. We know that people tend to tune off. You get all your playback stats. You can see how long people watch for. And we do know that people tend to tune out a little bit if there's no human face visible, if it's just watching slides and listening to a voice. So they've got that live facilitation. They've got the slides to back it up. They've got stats and numbers and sometimes just an interesting picture to look at and talk about on the screen, without the facilitators having to worry themselves about how that's happening. So yeah, really interesting bit of software, OBS. I know, Andy, I've just seen you've put a link in there. And really it is the glue that holds this together. So on one hand, we've got Teams that doesn't really do much of a social thing. It's great for conversations, doesn't do much in terms of social. It's got a chat, but it's not really set up for commenting. Meanwhile, we've got Workplace, which is great for the social side. Unfortunately, it doesn't do much in terms of being able to creatively broadcast, bring different elements in together. So just to answer the question, while I've seen it from David, yeah, OBS can work in that way. So you can output to anything that takes a video input. So it does have a direct link into things like Twitch, YouTube, Workplace, Facebook, the big streaming services. For anything else, it just pretends to be a webcam. So if you have a brand new application or something that no one else is really using, you just hit the button on OBS to say, be a webcam, and anything will pick up from there. And I suppose the output from that then was we ended up with a series of 4 broadcast plenaries. So this sort of thing, I won't play the video, it probably won't play very well streaming a video in this way, but we could have Rory there talking about, in this case, action plans. We've got an example of an action plan on the screen. We've got comments for people to read, so people can get involved in the conversation while it's happening. But Rory's not watching that. Rory's just getting involved in something that's he's quite passionate about. So, he just wants to lose himself in the moment. And then within those comments, we have our own team of facilitators that are just picking up any particular questions, even any issues. If someone's having trouble connecting, they can just handle that offline. So yeah, that's how we kind of took it from one place to another, took it from Teams and piped it through to Workplace. Like Andy says, without spending a penny. It's easy to set up. It does need a little bit of ingenuity about how it works. So, a couple of monitors is normally better than just having one with everything crammed on the same screen. So what I was doing is kind of having the input on one screen. You have to tell OBS to capture parts of a Teams conversation. So the way it works is you have Teams with the 2 video feeds coming in, and then you say to OBS, all right, you grab this bit of the screen and just use that as a video feed. So we can even swap from one talker to another. I can just hit a hotkey on the keyboard and Rory would be transformed into John if actually they decided to move the conversation between them. We did start out with a script. So we did start out with a plan of each 90-minute session that said, okay, Rory's going to talk about this, John's going to talk about that section. At this point, at this slide, this is almost your secret word. When Rory says this word, John's going to take over. So they'd had a conversation before about who wants to deliver what. As you can imagine, that evolved slightly, I think is the polite way. Sometimes at quite short notice when they decided that it'd be better another way. One of the nice things about OBS is you can set hotkeys up, so you can have a hotkey that says swap from this video feed to that video feed. So if the other presenter suddenly started talking, I can just hit a button and it's not that they're talking off screen. And you kind of have your fail safes, you have your backups. So you have a screen that just has both presenters on and no slides, which is your default. They've gone completely off script. They're just having a chat. Let's just show them both talking about it. And worst case scenario, you have a button that just brings up a screen that says, we're having some difficulties, plays a little bit of music and just allows you to do a bit of a reset.
Awesome. That's a good top tip, Chris. So I just want to understand the full setup. Have you got Rory and John sat side by side or facing one another? Have you got one camera or 2 cameras?
So that's a really good point that I may just have glossed over slightly. We didn't have them sat side by side. We had a fair few miles between them. So Rory, I think, is quite local to Barcelona, and John is somewhere in the Peterborough region. So they're joining a Teams conversation by webcam, and that can be done anywhere. So one of the great things about this, with lockdown, with a lack of travel, is we can bring people in, and that would scale. So we can go up to the maximum number of people in a Teams conversation, which has just been increased to 9. And I think that's going up to 16 later in the year. This is not fixed to Teams, by the way. I talk about Teams, I talk about Workplace because as a business with lots of rules about IT and procurement and network safety, they're the ones we use. This could be transferred to use Zoom, Skype, anything like that. So because you're just capturing a screen, if your monitor can display it, OBS can take that, can grab it and start transforming it, cropping it, editing it, filtering it. You can drop your Snapchat filters on if you want to put bunny ears on someone, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, they're nowhere near each other. They just have to be in the same conversation. So actually, it's quite nice that at that point we're leveraging the tried and trusted technology of things like Teams, where you know what, it's pretty reliable. People don't tend to be dropping in and out of conversations all the time. Millions of dollars go into making it a good experience. Thank you very much. We'll kind of borrow some of that technology.
And then you're using OBS to crop into the images of John and Rory, and then you're live cutting between them.
Absolutely. So yeah, all I tell OBS is I've got John and Rory full screen on one of my monitors. I tell OBS, this is the area of the screen that John is in. This is the area of the screen that Rory's in. So I then, at that point in OBS, I have two, what they call sources, one called John and one called Rory. And if I just click back to the OBS screen, OBS then works in a way where you have scenes and sources. So in the left-hand box at the bottom, you've got a list of scenes, and a scene could be a nice picture in the background. A scene could be, you know, an exercise we're doing that has a slide on. A scene can actually be a video, so we can just drop a full screen video in there. And each scene is made up of different sources. So what you're not seeing here, because I've not got Teams running, is you're not actually seeing the picture-in-picture, but down in this bottom right corner, you would have either Rory or John, you know, that cropped area of the screen appearing on top of that. And I can bring other things in. So if I decided that actually I don't want to see that person and the slide is more important, what I can do is I can have an extra slide that's full screen, and I can just bring that up to full screen. And the nice thing about OBS, the reason it's got this really solid reputation in terms of broadcasting, is you can go into, this is what you're seeing is studio mode. So on the left-hand screen where I've got reflective inquiry, that exercise, that's not currently being broadcast. That's what I'm lining up next. So I can decide, you know, suddenly if John starts talking about horses, I can bring, I've got a slide on horses. I can bring this up. He's skipped to this story he wants to tell. He made a change to his script and didn't tell me. So I can click through these, and these are all just getting lined up for next. And then I hit the transition button, and that just moves it through to the broadcast side. So I can do little tweaks. I can, you know, if I see something that needs changing in one of the slides, I can actually be working on it. I can be working on it live. So I wouldn't recommend that for a, you know, it's not very relaxing to do that, where you know you've got to use the slide in a few seconds and you're still working on it. But it is handy for last minute changes. It's handy for example, if the speaker changes, I can just turn Rory off, turn John on, and when I transition to that slide, it'll have the correct person in the bottom corner. And then whatever you see in this right hand window, that is what is going to go out with a short delay. So it gets sent to Workplace, it gets fed into Workplace. When you click go live, you've got an option for use a stream key. This uses that technology, so this communicates directly with the Workplace servers, sends the video output. Workplace goes, oh brilliant, yeah, there's a video feed there. It's, you know, it's got this specs, it's high definition, it's got this much sound coming through with it. It actually takes out one of those links. So what I'm not doing is I'm not sharing my screen to Workplace. That will then have extra compression. It'd have an extra element of lag. And if someone sent me an email, the email will pop up on the screen, and you know, it's saying something nasty about someone on the in the webinar.
Hey,
what I'm doing is I'm directly outputting video to the Workplace servers, and and it makes it more reliable. It also has the effect that if I play a video, so if I have an OBS scene set up that just has a full screen video playing, that's getting piped directly to Workplace. And that's really where this idea of one less connection in the chain plays off. I know when we were talking about doing this, one of the things they found is if you're having a Teams conversation, if you're sharing your screen and you go, hey guys, I want to play you a video, and you hit play, you've got to make sure your sound's set up right, and then it'd be quite jerky because Teams is designed for people's conversations. You know, people don't tend to move around too much when they're talking. They tend to have a little bit of movement in the middle of the screen, but actually all this stuff around the edge is staying still. So the compression is designed to cope well with that. If you throw a full screen action movie at it, the compression falls apart. It's not too good at that. So by feeding the videos directly into Workplace, it looks as good as watching it on your computer.
Can I just, sorry, other Andy, just pick up on something. I know, of course, you know, we've been on a journey in this. We started using OBS to live stream a couple of years ago, and we run like panel conversations into Workplace throughout the year. So we've been on a journey with it. I think that the simple option here is, first of all, OBS Studio. If you Google it, open source software, or there's a Streamlabs version of it, which is also free and open source. There are also paid for versions of online broadcasting software. And the paid for ones aren't better, by the way. They don't do anything. Trust me, I researched. We wanted to pay money to get something better and couldn't find anything. The difference for the paid for versions is they're easy to use. They're simpler. So there's inherently less features sometimes by making something more simple. But to the question I think that was asked earlier, someone was saying about, can you take a camera in? An input into OBS is literally anything that can be input into your, so if you think about what you do in Teams or what you've got on your computer, so you know, you can plug a webcam in, so therefore webcam directly can go into OBS. You can screen share, so therefore your screen can go directly into OBS. Or if you've got any other devices you plug in, it's an open source platform that will take any input and it'll output that as a broadcast. And although to the point about quality, this was the first question I put to Chris because unfortunately Skype does, but Teams doesn't have a feature to output your video like that, which is why Chris is using some sort of a screen clip essentially. But there's no loss of quality at all. It's exceptional quality. So you don't have to worry about that. But I guess those of you that either are of a technical mind or have people in your team that are of a technical mind, you can have a lot of fun with this. Those that aren't, there are simpler versions. So for example, I think it's all in the design. So you saw Chris's OBS screen, you saw he'd planned out scenes down to each individual slide to give him control. The truth is you could do that way simpler and have less going on, because remember, perfect sucks, it's not required. The key thing here is that we are broadcasting, not running a Zoom, Teams, Adobe Connect session deliberately and creating different experience. I think someone in the chat was talking about the struggling with breakouts in Teams. And you know, we have that same debate. We use Adobe Connect when we do run webinars in O2. And the one feature that stops us binning off that contract and just working in Teams is breakouts, because of what you can do with them. However, if you design for a live broadcast, you are not asking yourself, how do I do breakouts? You don't want to do breakouts. It's a fundamentally different design process. Think of it more like production and broadcast. And what you end up with in short terms is a session that took us, depending on whether you count Rory or not, 3 or 4 people to run. We trained 200 people in one sitting live. Because of the way live broadcasting works, playback is not a recording. It's not like if people watch this webinar back on recording, there's some interesting information, but the conversational part is actually quite hard to follow. You know, so if you watch someone's live stream in Facebook, we've got like a celebrity that runs live streams, and you watch them not live, it's almost as engaging as the live. So we trained 200 people live through this 2-day experience, where virtually, if not by 1 or 2, the number of people joining Plenary 1 on the first day was the same as the number of people that stayed with us. Didn't have to. In fact, it's easier to leave. We're not tracking names. There's no consequence of leaving. We don't care if you leave, but they all stay to the end. The second part is we're now, in terms of people that go joining that group and going through the whole experience on playback, we're at 450 people. At the end of the live stream, we got an NPS of 82. We're now at 77, including playback. So expect a drop in playback. But I think you'd agree that's exceptionally high levels of recommendation. In fact, Rory, the Chief Learning Officer we keep talking about, he's the one that, it's his content really. Although all he did was turn up and talk. So we'll take the credit, I think. He keeps coming back to me and saying, when are we doing another one? And my response last time is, why would we do that? We have you in a bottle. Like, there is literally no benefit. Not in the short term anyway, in the longer term maybe, but there's no benefit in us running an experience again when people can experience that without having to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, but there's been a good question that's come in that is, can you summarise the difference in the end user experience between what you've done and just getting them together on a Zoom call?
Yeah, I saw the question come in. I started thinking about that, and I suppose from my point of view, so I'm very technical. I can work out how the video is getting from place A to place B and what's being added to it, etc. Presentation, please, if you have any particular thoughts on my presentation skills, the chat is not the place for them. Andy will tell you I try and avoid too much being on video. And one of the benefits of a broadcast session, I think, is you get to split those roles out. You don't need someone that's absolutely amazing at pushing all the right buttons at the right time, as well as the presentation skills. So, in this example, we had Rory and John who can really talk the talk, and we had so much feedback to say that they were really engaging in the stories they were telling, and just the way they were working the crowd, I guess, was really emotional for some people. But just to be clear, Andy used this word first. The technophobe side of Rory meant that if we wanted him to control a Zoom session as well, certainly when you've got a screen share, you've got video coming in at the right place, and potentially dealing with any problems that happened, could be challenging. So finding that right skill set has been difficult in the past. And just really offloading.
Sorry to jump in, but just when I mean, Chris is making a really good point about the level of ability the presenter needs to have. But when we're talking about, so Rory's delivery is, in my opinion, world class. But when Chris says we don't want him controlling a Zoom session, actually getting him to press anything is a little bit scary. We spent 20 minutes with him helping him find out what the notification button was in Workplace or Facebook, until he had this light bulb moment at the end and said, oh, is that the little bell that has numbers on it? To give you an idea about where this guy is. So he's got a world-class delivery, but that's the level of comfort with technology. Sorry,
yeah.
Chris.
And sometimes it's the right thing to do to, just to hit the button that says go live and handle everything yourself. Sometimes you just have a message that you want to get out there and you've not got slides and videos and this whole juggling of media in the background. But I suppose in the same way, to get back to this professional broadcast element of you wouldn't have a TV show, even during lockdown where all the chat shows, etc., have been physically split out into the presenters' houses. You still had a production room full of people pressing the right buttons, checking sound levels, etc. And it could be something as simple as you forget to come off mute. We've got quite a nice side effect, actually, the way we're doing the sound on this OBS. It means I can talk to the facilitators, but no one else can hear my voice. So if someone happens to mute, or if they're a little bit quiet, or if we need them to move their camera, I can just kind of unmute and go, oh, can you just move your camera up a little bit, John? Thank you. And no one else has heard that. So it just adds a little bit of polish. Yes, it adds man hours. It's a little bit more complicated, but when you've got this level of, you want the level of engagement. You don't want technical blockers, but also you want something that you can really show off afterwards and use over and over again. Like Andy says, we've got that now in a bottle.
Excellent, thank you, Chris. Do you know what I said at the beginning? We'd be sort of 30 to 45 minutes. We've been 55. I knew it was a fascinating story to tell. we've got 5 minutes really to open it up to the attendees. I think you are about to get some questions about engagement and business impact rather than technical. So Joan, have we got the option to open it to panelists so that people are able to talk and share cameras?
Yes, we can if they want.
Yeah, go for it.
Their hand up possibly might be the way to do it.
Yeah, okay, so if anybody has a question to ask, please put your hand up, as Joan says.
David's put one in the chat. David, are you happy for me to promote you?
There we go.
Well, I was wondering, on a learning design point, whether there's a reason why you've gone to so much effort to get all the presenters in, when Mayer's research shows that actually not having the presenters there tends to lead to better performance for the learners.
So I don't know what you mean by gone to so much effort to have the presenters there. I think from a design point of view, it's important, especially in a digital environment, that our learners can connect with, at a human level, with both the content and the people delivering the content. So obviously I think the nature of this conversation in terms of how do we make that happen, one of the more complex component is how you bring video in over the top of other content. But if you look at this 2-day learning experience, first of all, the plenary session that we've spent most of our time talking about, the session that you join, is a minority of the time. Most of the time it's spent in reflective inquiry or activity. Secondly, you will find that what we didn't do is we didn't bring the presenter on screen and for the sake of it. What we did is we strategically brought in the relevant presenter or both of them to tell their story. So I'll give you an example. When Rory's bringing to life a particular piece of content, he'll spend very little time explaining a model because, as I said, there isn't a lot of content here, but often he'll do that with by means of telling a story. So to your point, I don't think Maya's research or any other model would argue that it's more effective to tell a story without being able to connect with the person. And I think that was a key thing for us. It was about creating connections in a way that was more human, and the focus was, that's technically, so if you look at video and sound, bringing that into the broadcast, that's the bit you don't want to get wrong. It's easy to create a slide share, it's easy to share a video, it's far harder to get the
So how long are the stories that they're telling?
Each individual story might be, I don't know, 10 minutes.
All right, well, that's within the realms of what Mayer was researching. And he found that if you only had the personalization bit there for the small bit at the beginning, it leaves you more able to concentrate not having the person there, which is counter to what your intuition is on it. And I was just wondering if there was a particular reason why you've gone down that route other than just intuition.
No. So what we did from a design point of view, I think, was very deliberate. And that's why I started off talking about our design principles, because that's what we hinge ourselves on. So, when I talk about breaking it into bite-sized chunks, to focus on bite-sized chunks, I don't just mean in how people consume it on playback, that they could just do the plenary on its own, but actually each individual piece of content, you could kind of consume that bit and walk away if you can't concentrate or focus, and that we don't linger on a particular point for too long. So I don't think that's just about presenters being shared, is it? It's also about not over-explaining and not sticking on the same point for too long.
I guess there's also an element of it, when the Universitas reopens, it's almost exactly the same experience to a certain extent, in that it's the same people telling the same story. So if somebody were to attend your broadcast session versus going to the Unitas, they'd feel the same level of connection to the presenter.
Yeah, they feel like they know Rory.
Okay.
They can even do day one online and day two face to face, and they will get exactly the same.
Yeah, excellent.
Can I just
we've got 2 minutes left, Andy.
One point in just a few seconds, because looking through the questions, it's there's lots of discussion about different platforms, different technology, and I know Joan made a point about engagement. The platform that we use is there purely because that's what's approved in Telefonica. It doesn't matter whether you have Yammer, Slack, Hangouts. Honestly, Zoom, Adobe Connect, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a blind bit of difference. Our sole focus here was on how we can broadcast rather than run a web. We do still run webinars for different reasons. What this creates is high profile, high impact, high scale, and a very large reach at very high quality. And the technology you use, apart from having broadcast capability, is completely unimportant.
Excellent. Well, do you know what? I started by saying it was a fascinating story, and I still think there's loads more to tell around this. I have to say a very big thank you to Andy Scrase, Chris Appleton, Joan, and all of the attendees for this session. Andy and Chris, if people want to hook up with you, how do you want them to do that?
In whichever way they want to. You can share my details, whether that's email, LinkedIn, whatever.
Well, Twitter, LinkedIn.
I'm on Twitter, but I probably won't see it. I don't go on there very often.
Email or LinkedIn would be good for me. I'm happy to talk about this further.
Yeah, great. So let me just check 2 more messages that come in. Great story, and thank you very much, Andy and Chris. Another comment around fascinating story. Said it would be, so well done, guys. Really appreciate your time. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.